HOA president stormed onto our porch while my pregnant wife rested peacefully. Within seconds, she grabbed my wife's arm and violently dragged her from the chair, nearly causing her to fall. My 7-month pregnant wife cried out in pain and fear for our unborn baby. But this cruel woman had no idea I was watching everything live. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The afternoon sun painted golden streaks across our front porch as I sat in my home office, reviewing security footage from earlier that morning. My pregnant wife, Emma, was 7 months along, and every day felt like a blessing mixed with worry. She'd been having a difficult pregnancy, constant fatigue, swollen ankles, and doctor's orders to rest as much as possible. I glanced at the live feed from our porch camera, a simple security measure I'd installed 6 months ago when we moved into this quiet suburban neighborhood. Emma was sitting in her favorite wicker chair, her hand resting gently on her rounded belly, a peaceful smile on her face as she read a book about baby names. The sight made my heart swell. Then I saw her. Margaret Patterson, or as everyone in the neighborhood secretly called her, HOA Karen, was marching up our walkway with that familiar scowl etched across her face. She clutched her ever-present clipboard like a weapon, her sensible shoes clicking against the pavement with military precision. My stomach dropped. Margaret had been a thorn in our side since the day we moved in. Every week brought a new complaint: our mailbox was half an inch too tall, our grass was a quarter inch too long, our car was parked 3 inches over some invisible line. But we'd tolerated it, paid the ridiculous fines, made the pointless adjustments. Emma always said it wasn't worth the stress, especially now with the baby coming. I watched the screen as Margaret stopped at the bottom of our porch steps, her face twisted with indignation. Even through the camera's audio, I could hear the sharpness in her voice. "Mrs. Harrison, you need to come inside immediately," Margaret announced, not bothering with pleasantries. Emma looked up from her book, confusion crossing her gentle features. "I'm sorry, what?" "You heard me. This is a direct violation of HOA Code 7.3, subsection B. No loitering on front porches between the hours of 2 and 5 p.m. on weekdays." I felt my blood pressure rising as I watched Emma's face fall. There was no such rule. I'd read that damn HOA manual cover to cover 3 times. Margaret was making things up again. "Margaret, I'm just sitting on my own porch," Emma said softly, her hand protectively covering her belly. "I'm not loitering. I live here. Don't talk back to me, young lady. I am the HOA president, and when I say you're in violation, you're in violation. Now get inside before I issue a citation." My wife's eyes filled with tears. Those pregnancy hormones made her more emotional than usual, but she stood her ground with quiet dignity. "I'm not doing anything wrong. My doctor told me to get fresh air and gentle movement. I'm just reading." That's when everything changed. Margaret's face turned an alarming shade of purple. She climbed the 3 steps to our porch, her clipboard raised like a club. "How dare you defy me? I'll have you evicted from this neighborhood. I'll make your life a living hell." I was already moving, racing from my office toward the front door, but I kept one eye on my phone screen, watching in horror as Margaret grabbed Emma's arm and tried to yank her out of the chair. "Let go of me!" Emma cried out, trying to pull away, but Margaret's grip was vicious. "You'll do as I say. Get in that house right now." Emma stumbled as Margaret dragged her toward the door, nearly losing her balance. My pregnant wife, my everything, was being manhandled by this cruel, power-drunk woman who cared more about her invented rules than human decency. I burst through the front door just as Emma let out a sob of pain. "Get your hands off my wife." My voice came out as a roar that startled even me. Margaret jumped back, releasing Emma's arm, but her face showed no remorse, only irritation at being interrupted. I rushed to Emma's side, helping her back into the chair. Her arm was already showing red marks where Margaret had grabbed her, and tears streamed down her face. She was shaking, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping my arm so tightly her knuckles turned white. Are you hurt? Is the baby okay? I asked, my voice cracking with fear. Emma nodded, but she couldn't speak through her tears. I could feel her trembling against me. I turned to Margaret, rage burning through every fiber of my being. What the hell is wrong with you? She's 7 months pregnant. You could have hurt her. You could have hurt our baby. Margaret had the audacity to roll her eyes. Oh, please. Don't be so dramatic. I barely touched her. She's fine. Barely touched her. I watched you drag her out of her chair. I watched you assault my pregnant wife on our own property. Assault? Margaret scoffed, clutching her clipboard tighter. I was simply enforcing HOA regulations. If she'd cooperated instead of being defiant, none of this would have happened. This is her fault for not following the rules. The complete lack of remorse in her voice, the casual cruelty, the way she blamed Emma for her own violence, it made me see red. But I forced myself to stay calm. I had something Margaret didn't know about. Emma, honey, let me see your arm, I said gently. She extended her arm, and my heart broke at the sight. Dark red marks circled her wrist and upper arm where Margaret had grabbed her. They were already beginning to bruise. Emma winced when I gently touched the area. I'm calling the police, I announced, pulling out my phone. Margaret laughed, actually laughed. The police? For what? You're wasting their time. I'm the HOA president. I have every right to enforce our community standards. You should be thanking me for maintaining property values. You assaulted my pregnant wife. I did no such thing. It's my word against hers, and I think we both know who the authorities will believe. I've been a respected member of this community for 15 years. You've been here for 6 months. Good luck with that. The smug confidence in her voice made me want to scream, but instead, I smiled. Actually, Margaret, it's not your word against hers. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means I have the entire incident on video. Crystal clear footage with audio. You grabbing my wife. You dragging her. You threatening her. Every single second. I watched the color drain from Margaret's face as the reality sank in. You're bluffing, she said, but her voice wavered. I held up my phone, showing her the live feed from our porch camera. Then I scrolled back 30 seconds, and there it was, her grabbing Emma's arm, yanking her with unnecessary force, Emma crying out in pain. That's illegal. Margaret sputtered. You can't record me without my consent. Actually, Margaret, I can. This is my property, clearly marked with security camera signs as required by law. You entered my property. You're not being recorded in any place where you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. I'm well within my legal rights. Are you? For the first time since I'd known her, Margaret Patterson was speechless. The police arrived within 15 minutes. 2 officers, a middle-aged man named Officer Davis and a younger woman named Officer Chen, listened carefully as I explained what had happened. I showed them the video footage, and I watched their expressions shift from professional neutrality to clear disapproval as they watched Margaret drag my pregnant wife across our porch. Margaret tried to interrupt several times, but Officer Davis held up his hand. Ma'am, you'll have your turn to speak. When the video finished, both officers turned to Margaret with hard eyes. Mrs. Patterson, what you did constitutes assault, Officer Chen said firmly. The victim is pregnant, which elevates the severity of the offense. You physically grabbed her, dragged her against her will, and caused visible injury. But I'm the HOA president. Margaret protested, as if that title made her above the law. I was just doing my job. Your job doesn't include putting your hands on anyone, Officer Davis said. HOA presidents have no legal authority to physically force compliance with community rules. You're not a law enforcement officer. You're a civilian who just committed assault, and we have it on video. Emma had calmed down somewhat, though she still trembled as she sat in her chair, holding an ice pack to her bruised arm. Officer Chen sat beside her, speaking in gentle tones. "Mrs. Harrison, I need to ask, are you experiencing any pain? Any cramping or bleeding? Any concerns about the baby?" Emma shook her head, but new tears rolled down her cheeks. "I'm okay, I think. Just scared. She grabbed me so hard, and I almost fell. I just kept thinking, what if I fall? What if something happens to the baby?" I was so frightened. My heart shattered into a million pieces watching my wife, my strong, kind, beautiful wife, reduced to tears by this bitter woman's cruelty. Emma had done nothing wrong. She'd been sitting on our own porch, reading a book, growing our child, existing peacefully. And Margaret had decided that wasn't allowed. Officer Chen's expression softened with sympathy. "I understand. I really do. I'm so sorry this happened to you. I have to ask, do you want to press charges?" Emma looked at me, uncertainty in her eyes. I knew what she was thinking. Emma had always been the peacemaker, the one who wanted to avoid conflict. Even now, after everything, she was probably worried about causing trouble. But I also saw something else in her eyes, a spark of anger, of injustice, of a mother's fierce protective instinct for her unborn child. "Yes," Emma said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Yes, I want to press charges. She hurt me. She could have hurt my baby. She needs to know that's not okay. Nobody should be treated like this." Pride swelled in my chest. That was my Emma, gentle but not weak, kind but not a doormat. Margaret's face went from pale to red to purple in a matter of seconds. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous. I'm the victim here. They're trying to ruin my reputation." "Ma'am, you need to calm down," Officer Davis warned. "Your reputation is the least of your concerns right now. Mrs. Patterson, you're under arrest for assault." "What? No. You can't arrest me. Do you know who I am?" "Yes, ma'am. You're someone who just committed assault on a pregnant woman, and we have clear video evidence. Please turn around and put your hands behind your back." What happened next would have been almost comical if the situation weren't so serious. Margaret tried to run. She actually tried to run from two police officers while clutching her precious clipboard. She made it approximately 5 steps before Officer Chen, who was probably 20 years younger and in far better shape, caught up to her and calmly guided her hands behind her back. "You're making this worse for yourself," Officer Chen said as she applied the handcuffs. "This is police brutality. I'm being persecuted for doing my job. I'll sue the department. I'll sue the Harrisons. I'll sue everyone." The neighbors had started gathering, drawn by the police cars and the commotion. I saw Mrs. Rodriguez from across the street, Mr. and Mrs. Kim from next door, the Johnson family from 3 houses down. They all watched with wide eyes as Margaret Patterson, the terror of Meadowbrook Lane, was placed in the back of a police car, still shouting about lawsuits and persecution. Officer Davis handed me his card. "Mr. Harrison, someone needs to take your wife to the hospital to get checked out. Even if she feels fine, given that she's pregnant and was physically assaulted, she needs to be examined. The medical report will also be important for the case." My blood ran cold. In all the chaos, I'd been so focused on the legal aspects that I hadn't fully considered the medical implications. What if Margaret had hurt the baby? What if Emma was injured in ways we couldn't see yet? "I'll take her right now," I said, my voice thick with renewed fear. Officer Chen smiled kindly at Emma. "Mrs. Harrison, I know this has been traumatic, but you did the right thing. What she did was wrong, and you're brave for standing up to her. I hope you and your baby are okay." As the police cars pulled away, one carrying Margaret, still shouting through the window, I helped Emma to our car. She moved slowly, carefully, one hand always on her belly as if she could protect our baby through sheer force of will. The emergency room was busy, but when I explained that my pregnant wife had been assaulted, we were taken back immediately. A kind nurse named Sarah got Emma settled in a bed while we waited for the doctor. Emma's tears had dried, but she looked exhausted, emotionally and physically drained. I held her hand, trying to be strong for her, but inside I was terrified. What if something was wrong with the baby? What if Margaret's violence had caused complications? The what-ifs spiraled through my mind like poison. Dr. Patel arrived after what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes. She was a woman in her 50s with warm brown eyes and a calm, confident demeanor that immediately made me feel slightly less terrified. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm Dr. Patel. I understand you were assaulted today. Can you tell me what happened?" Emma recounted the story, her voice steady but quiet. I watched her face as she spoke, seeing the fear and anger and disbelief play across her features. This shouldn't have happened. This should never have happened. Dr. Patel examined Emma's arms, documenting the bruises with photos and careful notes. Then she prepared the ultrasound machine. "Let's check on the baby, shall we?" she said gently. I squeezed Emma's hand as Dr. Patel squeezed gel onto Emma's belly and pressed the transducer against her skin. For a few seconds that felt like years, there was just the static sound of the machine. Then we heard it, the rapid, strong whoosh 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 of our baby's heartbeat. Emma burst into tears again, but this time they were tears of relief. I felt my own eyes burning as I blinked rapidly, trying to maintain some composure. "Heartbeat is strong and steady," Dr. Patel said with a smile. "Let's take some measurements and make sure everything looks good." She moved the transducer around, checking different angles, measuring different things. Emma and I watched the screen, mesmerized by the sight of our baby, our daughter, we'd learned at the last ultrasound, moving and shifting inside Emma's belly. "She's waving at you," Dr. Patel laughed, pointing to our daughter's tiny hand on the screen. After what felt like the most thorough examination in medical history, Dr. Patel turned to us with a reassuring smile. "The baby looks perfect. All measurements are normal, heartbeat is excellent, amniotic fluid levels are good, placenta looks healthy. I don't see any signs that the assault caused any harm to the pregnancy." The relief that washed over me was so intense I felt dizzy. Emma sobbed openly, clutching my hand like a lifeline. "However," Dr. Patel continued, her tone becoming more serious, "I need to stress that stress itself can cause complications in pregnancy. Mrs. Harrison, you've been through a traumatic experience today. It's important that you rest, stay calm, and monitor yourself for any unusual symptoms. If you experience any bleeding, cramping, decreased fetal movement, or anything else that concerns you, come back immediately. Understood?" Emma nodded. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Dr. Patel documented Emma's bruises, noting their size, color, and location. "These will heal on their own, but they'll probably get worse before they get better. That's normal with bruising. I'm prescribing some acetaminophen for pain if you need it, though try to use it sparingly. The police will need copies of all this documentation for their case. What that woman did to you was unacceptable, especially given your condition." As we left the hospital, Emma leaned against me, exhausted but relieved. Our baby was okay. That was what mattered most. But as we drove home, I felt anger building inside me again. Margaret had put our daughter at risk. She'd hurt my wife. She'd traumatized Emma during what should have been a happy, peaceful time in our lives. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Word spread through the neighborhood faster than wildfire. By the time we arrived home, there were at least a dozen neighbors standing in our front yard. My first instinct was to protect Emma from any more stress, but as we pulled into the driveway, I realized they weren't there to cause trouble. Mrs. Rodriguez rushed forward, her face creased with concern. "Emma, sweetheart, are you all right? Is the baby okay?" "We're okay," Emma said, managing a weak smile. "The baby is fine." "We saw what happened," Mr. Kim said, anger evident in his normally calm voice. I recorded part of it from my doorbell camera. Margaret grabbed you like you were a criminal. It was disgusting. We've all had enough of her, Mrs. Johnson added. Several heads nodded in agreement. She's been terrorizing this neighborhood for years, but this? Attacking a pregnant woman? That's beyond the pale. Over the next hour, sitting on our porch, the same porch where Margaret had assaulted Emma just hours earlier, we heard story after story. Mr. Rodriguez told us how Margaret had threatened to put a lien on their house over a mailbox issue that turned out to be based on a rule she'd invented. The Kims had been fined repeatedly for their son's basketball hoop, even though their property deed explicitly allowed it. The Johnsons had been harassed about their dog, despite the fact that their dog was a certified service animal and legally exempt from HOA pet restrictions. Everyone had a Margaret story. Everyone had been bullied, threatened, or harassed by her. But no one had felt they could do anything about it because she was the HOA president, and she'd convinced everyone that she had ultimate authority. We're filing a petition to have her removed as HOA president, Mrs. Rodriguez announced. We should have done it years ago. I'm ashamed we let it get this far. I'll sign it, Emma said immediately, her voice stronger than it had been all day. We all will, said Mr. Kim. This ends now. As the neighbors finally dispersed, each offering support and promising to testify on Emma's behalf if needed, I helped my wife inside. She was moving slowly, favoring her bruised arm, and I could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. Bath? I suggested. I'll make it nice and warm, just how you like it. She nodded gratefully. While Emma soaked in the tub, I'd added lavender salts that were supposed to be soothing. I sat in our living room and uploaded the porch camera footage to 3 different cloud storage services. I made copies on 2 external hard drives. I emailed copies to myself, to Emma, and to my lawyer brother in another state. That video was evidence, and I wasn't taking any chances with it. Then I did something I'd been considering all day. I created a YouTube account and uploaded the video with the title, HOA President Assaults Pregnant Woman on Her Own Property. I set it to private for now, but I wanted it ready. If Margaret tried to claim she was the victim, if she tried to twist the narrative, I had a nuclear option. When Emma emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in her favorite robe, she looked slightly more like herself. I'd made her favorite comfort food, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, and we ate together on the couch, watching mindless TV and not talking about Margaret or assault or any of it. But as we lay in bed that night, Emma's head on my chest, I felt her tears soaking through my shirt. I was so scared, she whispered. Not for me. I mean, I was scared for me, but mostly I was scared for her. She placed her hand on her belly. When Margaret grabbed me, when I stumbled, all I could think was, what if I fall? What if something happens to the baby? I've been so careful this whole pregnancy. I've done everything right. And she could have ruined everything in 5 seconds because she was on a power trip. I held her tighter, my own anger rekindling. I know, sweetheart. I know. But the baby is fine. You're fine. And Margaret is going to face consequences for what she did. I keep thinking about what the doctor said. About stress. What if this affects the baby later? What if the trauma causes problems down the line? Dr. Patel said everything looks perfect. We're going to focus on that. And we're going to do everything we can to make sure you're calm and happy for the rest of this pregnancy. No more stress. I promise. It was a promise I wasn't sure I could keep, but I meant it with every fiber of my being. The next morning, Emma woke up to find her bruises had darkened overnight, vivid purple and blue marks that looked even worse than they had the day before. I took photos, documenting them carefully, adding to the evidence against Margaret. Our phone started ringing early. First, it was the prosecutor's office, confirming that charges had been filed against Margaret Patterson for assault. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Chen, said the video evidence made it an open and shut case. Then came a call from a lawyer representing Margaret. He informed us in a condescending tone that Margaret intended to countersue for defamation, emotional distress, and false imprisonment. False imprisonment? I repeated, incredulous. She's the one who grabbed my wife. My client was simply performing her duties as HOA president. Your wife's refusal to comply escalated the situation. Furthermore, my client has suffered significant emotional distress from being arrested and humiliated in front of her neighbors. We're prepared to pursue damages. I hung up on him. They're really going to try to make her the victim, Emma said quietly, staring at her bruised arm. After everything. They can try. They won't succeed. We have the video, the medical records, the police report, and a neighborhood full of witnesses to her pattern of behavior. But Emma's faith in justice had been shaken. I could see it in her eyes. The woman who'd always believed in the goodness of people was learning a hard lesson about how some people twist truth to serve their own purposes. Over the next week, Margaret's lawyer tried every tactic. They claimed the video was edited. They claimed Emma had provoked Margaret. They claimed Margaret had barely touched Emma and that Emma was exaggerating her injuries for sympathy. They even tried to argue that Emma sitting on the porch was indeed a violation of some obscure HOA rule and that Margaret had the right to enforce it physically. But the truth was on our side, documented in crystal-clear video and medical reports. The court date for Margaret's assault charge arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. Emma's belly had grown noticeably in the 3 weeks since the incident, and she moved with the careful waddle of a woman in her third trimester. We'd bought her a new maternity dress for court, soft blue, respectable, the kind of outfit that screamed, innocent victim. Margaret arrived in a severe black suit, her hair pulled back, her face set in grim determination. She'd clearly been coached to look like a serious professional rather than the neighborhood tyrant she actually was. The courtroom was surprisingly full. Most of our neighbors had come to support us, and I was touched by the solidarity. Mrs. Rodriguez gave Emma an encouraging smile. Mr. Kim nodded at me. The prosecutor presented the case efficiently. The video was shown on a large screen, and I watched the judge's expression darken as she witnessed Margaret grabbing Emma, dragging her, Emma's cry of pain. The medical records were entered into evidence, photos of Emma's bruises, Dr. Patel's notes about the examination and the potential risk to the pregnancy. Margaret's lawyer tried to argue that his client had acted reasonably under the circumstances, that she was simply doing her job, that Emma should have complied with her directive. Your Honor, he said in his oily voice, Mrs. Patterson was well within her rights as HOA president to enforce community standards. Mrs. Harrison's defiance left her no choice. No choice but to physically assault a pregnant woman, the judge interrupted, her voice sharp. Counselor, I've watched that video 3 times now. Your client grabbed Mrs. Harrison with unnecessary force, dragged her from her seat, and caused physical injury. Even if Mrs. Harrison had been in violation of an HOA rule, which the evidence suggests she was not, Mrs. Patterson had numerous other options. She could have issued a written warning. She could have fined Mrs. Harrison. She could have brought the matter before the HOA board. Instead, she chose violence. That is not acceptable, and it is certainly not legal. Margaret's face turned red, then purple. I could see her wanting to speak, to argue, to assert her importance, but her lawyer kept his hand on her arm, keeping her silent. The judge continued, furthermore, Mrs. Patterson's complete lack of remorse, both at the scene and in her subsequent statements, demonstrates a concerning pattern of behavior. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a deliberate act by someone who believed her position gave her the right to put her hands on another person. The verdict came swiftly, guilty of assault. The sentence included a fine, community service, mandatory anger management classes, and a restraining order preventing Margaret from coming within 100 feet of Emma or me. As we left the courtroom, Margaret was surrounded by her lawyer and a few remaining supporters, but she caught my eye across the hallway. The look she gave me was pure venom. This woman had learned nothing, felt nothing, regretted nothing. Emma leaned heavily on my arm as we walked to the car. Is it really over? she asked. The criminal case is. But there's still the civil suit and the HOA matter. She sighed, her hand automatically moving to her belly where our daughter was kicking. I just want peace. I want to enjoy the last few weeks of my pregnancy without thinking about Margaret Patterson. You will, I promised. I'll handle the rest. 2 weeks later, the special HOA meeting to vote on Margaret's removal as president was held in the community center. Emma had initially said she wanted to attend, but as the date approached and her due date grew nearer, we agreed it would be better for her to stay home and rest. I went alone, armed with copies of the court proceedings and the video evidence, though I hoped I wouldn't need them. The community center was packed. Nearly every homeowner in Meadowbrook Lane had shown up, which was unprecedented. Normally, these meetings attracted maybe a dozen people, most of them Margaret's cronies. Tonight, there were at least 80 people crammed into the room. Margaret sat at the front table, her face set in rigid lines of anger and defiance. She'd brought her own supporters, a handful of neighbors who either feared her too much to oppose her or genuinely believed in her authoritarian approach to neighborhood management. Mrs. Rodriguez, who'd been voted temporary chairperson for this meeting, called the proceedings to order. We're here tonight to vote on the removal of Margaret Patterson as HOA president, following her criminal conviction for assault against a pregnant neighbor. Before we vote, we'll hear statements from both sides. Mrs. Patterson, you have the floor. Margaret stood, and I braced myself for whatever twisted logic she was about to spew. I have served this community faithfully for 15 years, she began, her voice dripping with self-righteousness. I have maintained property values, enforced standards, and kept this neighborhood beautiful and orderly. Have I always been popular? No. Doing the right thing rarely makes you popular. But I have always acted in the best interests of this community. She paused, looking around the room as if expecting applause. None came. What happened with Mrs. Harrison was an unfortunate misunderstanding. Yes, I touched her arm. Yes, she fell and bruised herself. But it was not intentional. I was simply trying to guide her inside, as she was in violation of community standards. The court's decision was based on a technicality and a video that didn't show the full context. I am the victim here, I've been vilified, arrested, humiliated, all for trying to do my job. If you remove me tonight, you're sending a message that this community doesn't care about standards anymore. You're opening the door to chaos. She sat down, looking smug, clearly confident that fear and habit would carry the day for her. Mrs. Rodriguez nodded. Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. Now, we'll hear from Mr. Harrison. I stood, my heart pounding. Public speaking had never been my strength, but for Emma, for our daughter, for all the neighbors Margaret had bullied over the years, I had to do this right. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, I began. Margaret Patterson assaulted my pregnant wife. Not an unfortunate misunderstanding. Not a technicality. Assault. A crime. I have the video right here if anyone wants to see it again. It shows exactly what happened. Margaret grabbed my wife, who was sitting peacefully on our own porch, and dragged her with enough force to leave bruises that lasted for weeks. My wife was 7 months pregnant. Our daughter could have been hurt. My wife could have been seriously injured. I looked around the room, making eye contact with my neighbors. But this isn't just about what happened to Emma. This is about a pattern of behavior that has made this neighborhood a hostile place to live. Margaret has abused her power for years. She's invented rules. She's levied unjust fines. She's threatened, bullied, and harassed good people who just wanted to live in peace. Every person in this room has a Margaret story. Everyone has felt her wrath over something trivial or imaginary. Heads nodded throughout the room. I saw people whispering to each other, sharing their own experiences. Margaret says she's been maintaining standards. But at what cost? Since when do the standards include violence? Since when do community values mean living in fear of your HOA president? A truly good leader inspires respect through fairness and reason, not through intimidation and threats. Margaret has confused fear with respect for so long that she doesn't know the difference anymore. I pulled out a folder. I have here 37 signed statements from residents of this neighborhood detailing Margaret's abuse of power. 37 families who have been harassed, threatened, or unfairly penalized. Some of these stories are infuriating. Some are heartbreaking. All of them paint a picture of a leader who has forgotten that she's supposed to serve this community, not rule it. Margaret's face was now a dangerous shade of red, but I wasn't finished. The court convicted Margaret of assault. That's a matter of legal record. But even if that hadn't happened, even if she'd never laid a hand on my wife, she would still be unfit to lead this community. Because leadership requires empathy, fairness, and the ability to admit when you're wrong. Margaret has demonstrated none of those qualities. Not at the scene of the assault, not in court, and not tonight. She still believes she did nothing wrong. She still sees herself as the victim. That level of delusion is dangerous. I sat down to scattered applause. Margaret looked like she wanted to explode, but the temporary rules of order prevented her from speaking again. Mrs. Rodriguez called for the vote. All in favor of removing Margaret Patterson as HOA president? A forest of hands shot up. I counted quickly, at least 75 votes in favor. All opposed? 5 hands. 5 people in a room of 80 still supported Margaret. The motion passes, Mrs. Rodriguez announced. Margaret Patterson is hereby removed as HOA president, effective immediately. We'll hold elections for a new president next month. This meeting is adjourned. Margaret shot to her feet, her chair clattering backward. You'll regret this. All of you. This neighborhood will fall apart without my leadership. Property values will plummet. It'll become a slum. But no one was listening. People were already filing out, some stopping to shake my hand or pat my shoulder. Mr. Kim gave me a firm nod. Mrs. Johnson hugged me and said, "Tell Emma we're thinking of her." As I drove home, I felt lighter than I had in weeks. It wasn't complete justice, Margaret would never truly understand what she'd done wrong, but it was accountability. It was the community coming together to say, enough is enough. Emma was still awake when I got home, lying on the couch with her swollen feet propped up on pillows. "How did it go?" she asked anxiously. I sat down beside her, gently lifting her feet onto my lap and massaging them the way she liked. 75-5. She's out. Emma's eyes filled with tears, happy ones this time. Really? Really? It's over, sweetheart. She can't hurt you anymore. She can't hurt anyone anymore. Our daughter chose that moment to deliver a powerful kick, strong enough that I could see Emma's belly move. We both laughed, some of the tension of the past weeks finally releasing. "She's celebrating too," Emma said, smiling through her tears. 3 weeks later, on a sunny Saturday morning, Emma went into labor. After 14 hours that tested both our endurance and patience, our daughter was born, 7 pounds, 6 ounces of perfect, healthy, beautiful baby girl. We named her Grace, because that's what we needed to move forward, grace to heal from what Margaret had done, grace to forgive even if we couldn't forget, grace to embrace the joy of our new family without letting past trauma steal our happiness. The first few weeks with a newborn were exactly as chaotic and exhausting and wonderful as everyone had promised. Emma recovered well from the delivery, though the bruises on her arm had taken weeks to completely fade. Sometimes I'd catch her looking at Grace with tears in her eyes, and I knew she was thinking about how close we'd come to losing this moment. The neighborhood rallied around us. Mrs. Rodriguez brought homemade meals every other day for 2 weeks. The Kims set up a meal train that kept our fridge stocked. The Johnsons gifted us a beautiful handmade baby blanket. Even neighbors we barely knew stopped by with diapers, wipes, and heartfelt congratulations. The new HOA president, a reasonable man named Tom Fletcher, immediately began reforming the association's rules. The invented regulations Margaret had created were struck down. The excessive fines were refunded. A formal complaint process was established so no one person could ever wield absolute power again. The neighborhood began to feel like a community instead of a dictatorship. Margaret herself had moved away. After her removal as HOA president and her criminal conviction, she'd put her house on the market and left the neighborhood within a month. I'd heard through the grapevine that she'd moved to another state, possibly to start fresh where no one knew about her assault conviction. I'd thought I would feel satisfaction when she left, but mostly I just felt sad. Sad for a woman so consumed by power and control that she'd destroyed her own reputation and relationships. Sad for all the years she'd wasted being angry instead of being kind. Sad that she'd probably never understand what she'd lost. But I couldn't dwell on Margaret Patterson. I had too much happiness in my life now to waste energy on bitterness. Grace was 6 weeks old when Emma and I finally felt brave enough to sit on the front porch together again. It had taken time for Emma to feel comfortable there, the place where Margaret had assaulted her, the place that had become a site of trauma instead of peace. But on this particular afternoon, with the weather perfect and Grace sleeping peacefully in her bassinet beside us, Emma had suggested it. I don't want to let what she did take away something I loved. That porch is ours. Those memories are ours. I want to make new ones. So we sat there, Emma in her favorite wicker chair, the same chair Margaret had dragged her from, and me beside her, one hand on Grace's bassinet, gently rocking it. The security camera was still there, still recording, a silent witness to this peaceful moment just as it had been a witness to violence weeks before. Neighbors walked by and waved. Mrs. Rodriguez stopped to coo over Grace. Mr. Kim asked if we needed anything. The Johnson service dog came over for pets, and we laughed as the gentle animal carefully sniffed Grace's bassinet as if performing a security check. Are you happy? I asked Emma as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She looked at Grace, then at me, and smiled, a real, genuine, full smile that reached her eyes. I'm so happy. What happened with Margaret was awful, and I'll never forget it. But she doesn't get to define our story. This is our story, us, our baby, our home, our community. That's what matters. I leaned over and kissed her forehead, then gently stroked Grace's soft cheek. Our daughter yawned in her sleep, her tiny fist curling and uncurling. You know, Emma said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about that video a lot. The one that saved us. If you hadn't installed that camera, if we hadn't had that evidence, Margaret might have gotten away with it. It would have been my word against hers, just like she said. People might not have believed me. The court might not have convicted her. She might still be terrorizing the neighborhood. The camera caught the truth, I said. That's all it did. It showed people what really happened, without spin or lies or manipulation. The truth was enough. The truth was enough, Emma echoed softly. I want to remember that. When Grace gets older and asks about the bruises in the photos from when I was pregnant with her, I want to tell her the truth. Not to scare her, but to teach her. That bullies exist, even adult ones. That standing up for yourself matters. That the truth matters. That community matters. I thought about the video that had started everything, the footage of Margaret's cruelty and Emma's courage. I'd never made it public. The YouTube video I'd uploaded as insurance still sat in my account, set to private, watched by no one except me and the lawyers who'd needed it for evidence. Part of me had wanted to share it with the world, to make sure everyone knew what Margaret Patterson had done. But Emma had asked me not to, and I'd respected her wishes. I don't want to be defined by being a victim, she'd said. I don't want our daughter's first internet presence to be a video of her mother being assaulted while pregnant with her. Let's just move forward. So we had. We'd moved forward with Grace, both the name of our daughter and the spirit of our healing. As darkness fell and the porch light automatically clicked on, we gathered up our sleeping baby and went inside. The camera continued recording, as it did every day, documenting our peaceful life, ready to protect us if danger ever came again. But for now, there was no danger. There was just a family, safe and happy in their home, beginning their lives together. And sometimes, late at night when Grace woke for her feeding and the house was quiet except for her soft nursing sounds, I'd think about that afternoon when everything changed. When a cruel woman's moment of violence became a community's moment of awakening. When a simple security camera became a tool of justice. When my wife's courage in pressing charges became a catalyst for change. Margaret Patterson had tried to drag Emma down, both literally and figuratively. But all she'd really done was show everyone her true nature and unite a neighborhood against bullying and abuse of power. She'd tried to steal Emma's peace, her safety, her joy. Instead, she'd lost everything while we'd gained a community, justice, and the precious gift of our daughter. In the end, the camera had captured more than just an assault. It had captured a turning point, the moment when good people decided they'd had enough, when victims became advocates, when a neighborhood became a community. That was the real story, the one worth telling. Grace finished nursing and let out a satisfied little sigh, her eyes already drifting closed again. Emma smiled at me across our daughter's head, her expression full of love and contentment and hard-won peace. The live camera kept recording outside, a silent guardian. But inside, we were writing a different story, one of love, family, community, and resilience. One of healing and hope and new beginnings. One where the woman who tried to hurt us ended up bringing us closer together and making us stronger. And that was the best revenge of all, living well, loving fully, and refusing to let bitterness and anger steal our joy. Margaret Patterson had lost everything trying to control us. We'd gained everything by choosing love, truth, and community instead. Grace opened her eyes one more time, looked up at her mother with unfocused newborn wonder, and then drifted back to sleep with a tiny smile on her face. And I thought, this moment right here, was what Margaret's cruelty had tried to destroy. But it had failed. Love had won. Family had won. Truth had won. And we were finally, blessedly, at peace.